Hey guys, this is Dave, and we're going to be taking a look at this, the Fiio K15 Dac amp streamer. Of course, there is also the K17, which is the next model up from this, and it increases the power output. It has upgraded DAC chips, an upgraded power supply, and more, but it also does jump up in cost from $569 up to $990. So the K15 has a very similar form factor, and it also implements not all, but some of the same types of features that are offered by the K17, but obviously some changes were made to make this one a little more affordable. So for the last few weeks, I've been testing and pairing the K15 with different headphones and IEMs, and also comparing it with some of my other devices. And I think I'm ready to share my thoughts and impressions of the K15. So as usual, we'll go over what's included in the box, we'll talk about specs, go through its features, and then we'll get into sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So this is everything that comes in the box with the KA15. It has a power cord, I've got it plugged in so you can't see it, a remote, 2 USB cables, a headphone adapter, and then an extra fuse. And then there's also a little cap or cover for the XLR output. Now, usually when you hear me refer to an all-in-one, typically that means that device is both a DAC and headphone amplifier, but the K15 takes that a step further and also adds streaming capabilities and a 3.93-inch color touch display. So while its $569 asking price might seem a little high, you're actually getting a lot for your money when compared with other all-in-one devices, again, within this price range. On the front, again, you've got this 3.93-inch color touch display, a power switch, an output selector switch, 5 mode gain selector switch, an extra USB input, a menu and volume knob, a 6.35, 4.4 balanced and XLR balanced headphone output. On the back, on the outsides, on either side of the unit, you have your Wi-Fi antennas, you then have your optical, coaxial, USB Type-C and A digital input. You also have an Ethernet or LAN port and a reset button. Below that is a grounding terminal, a 4.4 balanced line input, RCA inputs and outputs, balanced XLR outputs, an AC DC toggle switch, a DC and AC power input, and a power switch. And then going back to the front of the unit, on the front again of the K15 is a touch display, and it does have a simple, straightforward user interface which gives you access not only to all of your system settings like the language and brightness options, network options, themes, RGB lighting options, but also all of your audio and playback settings and controls like input selection, 10-band PQ, EQ presets, filter options, max volume and balance controls, plus more. And again, you've also got several playback options, either using the digital or analog inputs from your PC or other source. You can also plug an external storage device into the USB input on the back of the device, and then you can play music stored on that device. You can connect via Bluetooth if that's your thing, but since this device is Roon ready, my preferred method of playback was either using Roon via the Ethernet network, which I've got that connected right now, or using a direct USB connection. Of course, you can also stream via either a 5 gigahertz or 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi connection using AirPlay, although that connection doesn't really allow you to take full advantage of the higher bitrate capabilities that the K15 has to offer. That can only be achieved received either using the gigabit Ethernet connection or the USB input. Speaking of which, the K15 can decode up to 32-bit PCM and DSD512 via USB, 32-bit PCM and DSD256 via local playback and streaming, 24-bit PCM and DSD64 via coaxial, and then 24-bit PCM via the optical input. Now on the inside are two AK4497S DAC chips, and of course, that means that this is fully balanced, and those work in combination with a discrete architecture Class AB transistor current boosting amplifier circuit. And that's, I think, what makes this so different is that you've got 8 transistors that are biased into Class AB operation, functioning as amplifiers. And that's going to give you a pretty decent amount of power output. You get an impressive 3 watts of power at 32 ohms out of the balanced outputs. And again, it is fully balanced. And even with a 300 ohm load, you're still going to get 350 milliwatts. And then it will give you 1.4 watts out of the 6.35 millimeter single inlet output. And of course, again, that's with a 32 ohm load. And then one last thing before we move on to sound, I just quickly want to talk about the design. They've gone a little bit of a different direction, and they've kind of gotten away from the more contemporary look of the K19, and they've gone with this more classic or retro approach, which I think looks pretty cool. And as for the build quality, I've come to expect nothing less than excellence from Fiio, and the Fiio K15 certainly lives up to that standard. The chassis feels very solid, the selector switches feel nice, they feel tight, they have a little bit of a click, and the menu and volume knob feel really nice as well. But as I had mentioned a moment ago, although $569 it's not cheap, I get that, but when you step back and you look at not just everything that this has to offer in terms of its features, versatility, its power output, and then you also look at the amount of effort and thought that went into the internals and into the engineering, and there's a lot I didn't even cover. Point being, though, is when you look at all that, you step back and look at all that, I really do think that you're getting a lot for your money here. And as we get further into the sound segment, I think that's only going to support or corroborate that even further. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and move on to sound. So as I had mentioned earlier, in regards to all of the engineering and the specifications, there's actually a lot that I didn't cover. But if you are interested in reading more, I will make sure and drop the product link in the description. Now, in terms of the K15's power output, when you look at the K series, you are going to be getting less power with the K15 than you would be with the K17 or K19. The K19 puts out up to 8 watts, the K17 4 watts. This is going to give you up to 3 watts, but that's still really good. I had no issues driving basically all of my full-size sets, and bottom line though, there's just going to be very few headphones out there that you can throw at this that this will not be able to drive, not just loudly and with headroom to spare, but also to pretty impressive performance levels as well, again, for this price point. And I also tested this with, of course, a very wide variety of IEMs with different impedances and sensitivities, and from different budget ranges, from entry-level sets up to some pretty high-end sets, I guess. And first, let's go ahead and talk about noise, the noise floor. It's pretty much completely noise-free in low, medium, and high gain with IEMs. So using my 2020 Andromedas, I did hear the slightest bit of background noise in super high and ultra high gain mode, which doesn't matter because you're only going to need low gain, at the most medium gain for IEMs anyways. Now, as far as some of the full-size headphones I used to test this with. I have my HD 800S, I've got the Empyrean 2's LCD3 2022 version, Poet, Aria Stealth, 109 Pro, the newer FT7, and then some mid-tier sets like the new Moondrop Para 2, 105 AER, 105 Silva, Baroque, 99 Classic. And as far as IEMs, I paired this with the Divas, the Kuyas, Monarch MK3, the new Afu Dawn X, Cantors, FA19, and a bunch of others, including some mid-tier sets like the i600, Pilgrim, Studio 4, Vulcan 2. Point being though, is I tested this with a lot of different stuff, and it paired with and drove everything very nicely. So it's delicate enough for sensitive IEMs and powerful enough to handle most full-size sets. And unless you've got something very rare and exceptionally hard to drive, the K15 should be able to power, again, most anything that you can throw at it. So how does it sound? Well, to me, it sounds pretty linear, although I have heard some describe it as warm, and I would kind of agree with that. I would agree to a degree. And what I mean by that is, to my ears, if it leans any direction, I would say it does tilt very slightly warm, especially if you're coming from something like my K19, because the K19 is obviously quite a bit more clinical, and it uses ESS DAC chips compared with these AKM chips, which you could say these have maybe a little more of a smooth presentation compared with those. And even when I compared this with something like the DNA Alpha Pro here, which also uses ESS chips, to me, the Alpha Pro does come across as maybe more linear compared with the K15. To my ears, the K15 is just a little smoother in its treble presentation, and it has what some might call I hate to use these terms, musical or natural. Bottom line though, is that while this does have a little bit of coloration to it, it really is just ever so slight to my ears. And again, this does still fall very much within the range of linear. And again, although the treble presentation might be considered to be maybe a little smoother, it still has great treble detail, and at the same time, again, I didn't hear any over sharpening, no edginess, and if anything, again, it sounded more smooth to my ears, but not so smoothed that I felt like I was missing any detail. It still gives me plenty of air, plenty of micro details, and it's still what I would consider, again, to be linear from one end of the spectrum to the other. So it extends all the way up into the upper treble, giving you, again, good treble detail, good extension, good amounts of air, micro nuances, if they are present in the recording, but also the opposite direction into the lowest sub-bass frequencies, providing basically all of the sub-bass rumble you could ever want. So again, from one end to the other, it's giving you a pretty complete picture. And another trait, of course, I look for in a device is instrument and vocal naturalness. So does wood sound like wood? Does metal sound like metal? Do cymbals sound like metal? Do voices sound real? And I did go on a slight rant a while back with, I think it was the DNA Alpha Pro, and I won't do that again, but I do kind of want to summarize what I'd said in that review, because it does kind of relate to this. It relates to how this made me feel. So what I was talking about, again, was instrument and vocal naturalness, and essentially my point was that in the hobby, beyond all of this gear and beyond the stuff, beyond the hobby, the goal of this stuff isn't necessarily about finding that connection with the stuff, so with the headphones or with the gear. The goal is to get lost in the music and to connect with the music. And really, the goal is to not even be aware of this stuff. And while typically I do seem to be able to make that connection a little faster with my higher end gear, that's not necessarily always the case. And this is one of those devices that, while it wasn't ultra detailed and ultra resolving, and again, it does have the maybe the slightest amount of coloration, when I paired this with some of my higher end headphones and IEMs, it gave me enough detail and it was resolving enough so that I was still able to make a pretty strong connection with my music and make it pretty fast. And I would say that's probably my biggest takeaway from this experience. And I will come back to that in a moment. In any case though, point being, the K15 does sound very, very natural to me. And again, using the Lady Be Good track off of Jazz at the Pawn Shop, cymbals sounded real. They sounded like metal, and you could hear the wood in the drumstick and the texture, the brushes. You could hear the richness of the saxophone. Everything just sounded natural and correct. Bass notes also were very textured. They had good dynamics. Again, you had a really good extension. Now, as far as comparisons, in my testing, in my opinion, this is not the most dynamic or most detailed and resolving all-in-one desktop unit out there at this price point. But I should point out that the competition is also very sparse. The older AU and S9C Pro comes to mind, the Topping DX7 Pro Plus comes to mind, and I don't have those in hand, but again, and those are DAC amp combos and do not have streaming capabilities. I would say the closest thing I have on hand is the Alpha Pro here. Again, also a DAC amp combo without streaming capabilities. And I will say, I do think the Alpha Pro can outperform the K15 by almost every metric. So it is more detailed, it's more resolving, it's more dynamic, it's more powerful, but again, it does not offer streaming capabilities. And I do still feel like the K15's sound performance, while again, maybe having a slightly different presentation and having maybe just a small amount of coloration, it still allowed me to make a pretty strong connection with my music when I paired this with my higher end headphones and IEMs. So just to kind of summarize my thoughts with the K15, its feature set as far as how it combines the streaming capabilities into an all-in-one unit is actually pretty unique at this price point. Plus, it's extremely quiet. It's well within the range of linear, it's transparent, it's natural, it's powerful. The design is unique and it's built and engineered very, very well. And again, $569 isn't necessarily cheap, but considering what you get for that price, it is really hard to deny the value that this brings to the table. So again, bottom line, do I recommend it? Well, in terms of sound performance, this is, again, it's not going to necessarily offer the highest level of sound performance, but instead will still offer very good performance for this price point. But I think what sets this apart from its competition is its ability to connect to a Wi-Fi network or Ethernet network and its streaming capabilities. And again, the addition of this touchscreen is also really, really nice. So if those features are important to you, but you also need good power output, you expect good sound engineering, again, a very robust build, and you want to feel confident that you are getting a solid, reliable product, again, with these features, then the K15 is certainly something I would take into consideration. But anyways, I think that does it for this video. If you are new to Giz Audio and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please like this video, please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.